about, 49 minutes ago, SF Giants pitchers have started calling their own games. Quote, trust factor. And then some of the article goes into the depth of Logan Webb. He's starting to do it recently. Maybe that coincides with how well he's been pitching because he's calling his own games. This is the quote. I didn't throw the best until then, his 7 one-hit innings in Milwaukee. I just came back and thought, I've done it before. I haven't thrown to these guys a lot. I mean, I was with Patrick Bailey for a long period of time. There's a trust factor in those sorts of things, talking about, calling his own games now with the likes of Haas, Susak. And the pitching coach says, quote, it's definitely a learning process for all of us. So we're just encouraging our guys to maybe call their own games. You saw Robbie Ray do it a little bit in Atlanta, and Landon Roop did it a little bit as well. And joining us now on the River Islands guest line, Evan Webeck. Evan, good morning. Joe Spadoni alongside Joe Shasky, just reading some of the excerpts from your latest article for the California Post on the SF Giants pitchers starting to call their own games and using the term trust factor. That was Logan Webb's words. Is that something or nothing for you in light of all this questions coming out of Tony Vitello and whether or not he has a full grip on this locker room?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something and not nothing for sure. Is it like super substantial? Logan, I mean, he's called his own games before, right? Logan has, and he wasn't earlier this season. And you saw the results. Part of that had to do with the bursitis in his knees. He got the rest and he's back. But basically, if you look at his stretch of pitching here, these last 4 starts, 31 innings, 3 earned runs. I mean, it starts the first game where he calls his own pitches is that, perfect game bid, no hit bid, ultimately 1 hit, 7 inning outing in Milwaukee. And he follows that up with these 3 straight 8 inning outings. So it's clearly a difference and maybe the primary difference between what was going poorly for Logan to start the season and what's gone right now. And I mean, look, he said it took some time for him to build trust with Patty Bailey too. And obviously they built a tremendous relationship where, I mean, there was essentially just mind melt between the two of them in that battery to the extent that Logan didn't throw to anybody else in spring training. And, for the most part, the Giants staff was preparing to throw to Patrick Bailey all season. And, when you trade your starting catcher, a guy who's expected to catch probably 150 games over the course of the regular season, it's going to cause some complications. And I think this is the result of that. I think the most telling quotes to me came from Adrian Houser, who obviously has not had a ton of success here. But he was telling me, I mean, he worked for 2 teams last year with a ton of catchers. And he said he had better, he used the term, ping pong, essentially just like a back and forth, a dialogue where, they build a relationship and they kind of get to know each other. And this is a process that every pitcher and catcher in the major leagues goes through, right? I mean, it's catchers learn the pitchers, then pitchers, learn the catchers, and, ultimately there's only so much time to call the pitches. So you got to be on the same page. And Hauser said he's not been on the same page as much with any of the Giants catchers as he has been with any of the catchers he worked with the White Sox and the Rays last year. And I guess the one thing that I would say to maybe downplay this is that it is primarily still Logan who is calling the majority of his own pitches. The rest of the staff has started to experiment with it, but it's still Logan who's doing it the majority of the time. Like Robbie Ray, for example, he's recently started throwing his 2-seamer more instead of his 4-seamer. He used to live at the top of the zone and kind of rely on that 4-seam, but he's started implementing this 2-seamer. And he said, well, I have more conviction in this 2-seamer than maybe, Haas or Susak does, because they just don't, they're not there yet. It hasn't, they haven't gotten up to speed with, with the comfortability of the pitches. So for the most part, it's when guys are going to shake off, then they press the button on the pitch that they want to throw. So, Susak said it's like something like 10 pitches a game for most of the staff, but for Logan, it's been a real source of the success of late. And I think you see what Justin Message said, and it has been a challenge getting these guys up to speed. they're basically learning on the fly now. They were there in spring training, but it was Patty Bailey who was doing the majority of the catching and, the game planning. So they're still, it's something like 6 weeks since the trade, and they're still kind of feeling the effects of that. And you see that in the catchers' ERAs. It's almost a 1.5 higher. If you look at their ERA thrown to Bailey versus their ERA thrown to anybody else.
All right, so you were there over the weekend, correct?
I was.
All right. So, I've been watching this Giants team my entire life. I've been coaching, playing, again, watching over 40 years. And I've never seen anybody at a professional level do what Rafi Devers did. And then obviously avoiding the butt slap of Jace Tingler. What was the tenor like immediately after you were standing there peppering Tony Vitello with some great questions? Was he his normal self after the game?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see a pattern of behavior from Tony. It was kind of the same thing after Adames, back last month in Los Angeles. He loses track of the outs and he gets doubled up at second base. And it's like, well, should there be some accountability here? Do you need to talk to him? Do you need and it seems like Tony really likes, we don't know how he handles these things internally. We can't see behind those closed doors. But in terms of just the public optics of it, it seems like Tony wants I have yet to hear him really be critical of his players in the press, and that's perfect. That's not necessarily a bad thing from a manager, especially these days when players are getting paid so much and they have so much power. And especially you look at Adames and Devers. These guys are making $30 million. They're making 10 times what Tony makes. They have longer term contracts than so there's more job security. Yes, there needs to be accountability in the clubhouse. Devers needs to be held. When you're making $31 million, the expectation is that you're going to be something of a leader, at least either on the field or in the clubhouse. And so far, that hasn't been the case with him. You can say Adames is a good clubhouse presence, but, the play on the field hasn't lived up to the contract. I think you're seeing a first-year manager coming in with, it was all the questions that we had, right? It's like, how is this guy going to handle the big personalities and big egos of major league stars who are making, tens of millions of dollars a year, hundreds of millions of dollars on their contracts? And I think, the answer is, he's massaging it. And I think he has been hesitant, to say anything publicly about them.
No. So Evan, let me stop you right there. Okay, I want to peel this like an onion real quick. Okay. So after you talk with Tony Vitello on Sunday, you're standing there, you're asking them back and forth. You go into the clubhouse and see all the players. Is that correct?
Yep. That's right.
Okay. What was
162?
Yeah. What was the vibe like when you walked in on Sunday versus maybe a normal game?
I didn't necessarily notice anything different from a normal loss, I would say. The difference is that, we had to ask Matt Chapman about the incident rather than Rafi Devers, because Rafi Devers doesn't talk to the press. We go in there and he's at his locker and, we ask would you like to address the situation? And, the team PR official, his translator says no, he doesn't want to talk. I asked him, he doesn't want to talk. So that ends up, putting the onus on his teammates to then try to make sense of the situation, which, it's just not a good look. What happened on the field, terrible optics. It made no sense in the moment. The move was just the most common sense in the world. Your slow space runner is the tying run on first base.
Exactly.
Of course, you're going to put Jonah Cox in a move that's been made a million. It's the only reason Jonah Cox is on the roster. It's the only time he gets in the game, right?
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. You've been, I don't know, couple hundred games the last 2 years, 200 and however many. How many of the 165, give or take, that Rafi's been in a Giants uniform, how many times has he been available to talk after a game?
Great question.
It's a good question. Oh, man, doing the math on my head, maybe like a dozen or so. It's tough because, you're not asking after every game, right?
Sure.
You're asking when he does something good, and you're asking when he does something bad. When he has a moment in the game, when he's an important factor in the game. I would say not particularly available, I would say. It's not a never, but it's not very often. And I think it's a product of him. He came over and he seemed to be pretty skeptical of the press from, I think, his treatment in Boston. And I mean, the San Francisco media is not the Boston media, right? I mean, there are a lot of times. There are a lot of times when we've been trying to talk to Rafi and we're just trying to say like, hey, like, what's up, man? Like what's going right for you? And he's not having any part of it. Of course, the start of the season didn't help in those regards where, there were some tough questions to be asked. And, he seems like a guy who just wants to play. I've never seen or experienced someone who's so reticent to speak to the media, but I also didn't cover Barry Bonds. So,
hey, Evan, we appreciate your time this morning, man. And we'll be reading you in the California Post going forward.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
There he goes. Giants beat writer for the California Post, covers all Bay Area teams.